The Republican governor has signed a law that allows local and state law enforcement to arrest migrants they suspect crossed into the country illegally.
Right now, law enforcement officers in Texas can start arresting people suspected of crossing the border illegally.
The Supreme Court has just put a pause on a controversial immigration law that was about to go into effect in Texas.
Police can arrest people suspected of crossing illegally, and under the law, judges can order people back across the border.
The law was set to take place on Tuesday. Officials in the state are appealing that ruling.
Texas migrants arrest law. Confusion at the border between the U.S. and Mexico on Wednesday sprang from a bewildering flurry of courtroom maneuvers surrounding a Texas bill that would allow the state to arrest and deport those who enter the country illegally. As migrants, police chiefs and sheriffs awaited guidance. A three-judge panel of the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals questioned Texas with skepticism during a hearing that concluded without a decision, putting the new legislation on hold for the time being. It was a part of a frenzy of events that included the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to permit the law to go into force on Tuesday for a few hours. The legal battle surrounding Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott's most recent step to stop illegal border crossings will not end, regardless of the three-judge panel's decision. Yolanis Campo, 42, suggested other migrants choose a different path due to the uncertainty surrounding Texas legislation. Campo went from Colombia and crossed the Rio Grande to enter the U.S. from Mexico with her 16-year-old daughter. Agents from the Border Patrol processed her and gave her an ankle bracelet so she could continue with her immigration case. Campo, who was staying at the McAllen shelter, said, "It's more complicated because federal authorities tell us we can move on, but this new law complicates everything because it says we can't move on." Fifth Circuit Chief Judge Priscilla Richmond questioned how the state statute would be implemented during the hearing on Wednesday. She specifically asked about Texas's response in the event that federal authorities refused to comply with a state judge's deportation order. It remained in force on Tuesday without any reported arrests.
Breaking news overnight, lawmakers in Texas passing a strict new immigration bill.
Right now, law enforcement officers in Texas can start arresting people suspected of crossing the border illegally.
The law was set to take place on Tuesday. Officials in the state are appealing that ruling.
Police can arrest people suspected of crossing illegally, and under the law, judges can order people back across the border.
According to state law, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security does not have the jurisdiction to deport someone. According to Texas Solicitor General Aaron Nielsen, "We don't have any cases on it, so this is uncharted." According to the Justice Department, Texas's bill will destabilize the border and is an egregious breach of federal authority. Republican former President Donald Trump's appointee, Judge Andrew Oldham, grilled the department's attorneys. Judge Irma Ramirez, the third member of the panel and a Democratic appointee of President Joe Biden, had earlier voted to halt the law. Republican President George W. Bush nominated Richmond, who refuted Texas's claim that it is using its core police power, forcing Nielsen to concede that deporting individuals has historically been a federal duty. Nielsen refuted the claim that Texas is trying to take over the field in terms of border enforcement, stating instead that the state is eager to work with the federal government to find a solution. Nielsen added that he was unsure of how the rule would apply to someone who traveled from another state to Texas but entered the nation illegally.
The Republican governor has signed a law that allows local and state law enforcement to arrest migrants they suspect crossed into the country illegally.
Senate Bill 4 makes crossing the border into Texas at any point other than a point of entry a state misdemeanor crime.
It also allows judges to deport some of these migrants back to Mexico if they see fit.
Federal judge blocks a law there that allows police to arrest migrants who enter the U.S. illegally.
Although the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, Steve McCraw, has stated that he anticipates the rule will primarily be enforced close to the U.S.-Mexico border, Republican lawmakers wrote it so that it would apply to all 254 counties in the state. Despite giving differing accounts of how they would uphold the law, dozens of Texas sheriffs gathered in Austin on Wednesday to show their support for Abbott. People who lived further away from the border stated they didn't think it would affect them much. "We won't be going after minorities or anything similar." Parnell McNamara, the sheriff of McLennan County, works a few hundred miles from the border. Our law-abiding citizens, particularly those in McLennan County, shouldn't have to worry about the police. The law's merits were not decided by the Supreme Court. Rather, it dismissed a challenge brought by the Justice Department and sent it back to the lower appeals court. The state has appealed a harsh injunction issued by a lower court judge that placed the statute on hold, and the Fifth Circuit has been reviewing the case. According to Texas law, immigrants facing allegations of illegal entrance may consent to a judge's order to leave the country or risk legal action. On the other hand, Mexico has declared that it will not return anyone who is given the order to cross the border. During his regular news briefing on Wednesday, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador stated, "Of course we're against this draconian law, completely opposed." Several states run by the GOP are already considering imitating Texas. Legislators in Iowa backed a bill on Tuesday that would also allow state law enforcement to detain individuals who are in the country illegally and have previously been refused entrance. It would go into effect in July if Republican Governor Kim Reynolds signs it. The uncertainty in Texas is similar to other immigration conflicts that were stoked by congressional inaction under the Trump and Biden administrations. The Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals overturned a Trump policy in 2020 that required asylum claimants to wait in Mexico before appearing in U.S. immigration court. However, the court stated that its ruling only applied to California and Arizona, not to New Mexico or Texas, as those border states fell outside of its purview. Later, the Supreme Court ruled that the cross-border implementation of the policy should continue. From a record high of 250,000 in December, the number of arrests for illegal crossings decreased by half in January, with notable drops in Texas. The busiest corridor recently has been Tucson, Arizona. In January, it was San Diego. However, the causes for these abrupt changes are sometimes convoluted and controlled by smuggling gangs. Administration officials praised Mexico for increased enforcement on that portion of the border when Biden traveled to the Rio Grande Valley last month for his second border visit as president. They added that in Sonora, the state that is located south of Arizona, things were more difficult for Mexican law enforcement. Temporarily block on Texas law. Justice Samuel Alito on Monday issued an order that temporarily halts Texas's immigration law from going into effect until next week, so the full court can decide what steps to take next. The law was set to take effect Saturday under a lower court's decision.
The Supreme Court has just put a pause on a controversial immigration law that was about to go into effect in Texas.
The decision means that things will remain as they have been over the past weeks.
Local cops arrest and jail migrants they suspect of crossing the border illegally.
The Supreme Court has temporarily blocked a tough new immigration law in Texas from taking effect today.
Alito's order putting it on hold until March 13 came just hours after the Justice Department asked the Supreme Court to intervene. The emergency request came after a federal appeals court over the weekend stayed U.S. District Judge David Ezra's sweeping rejection of the law signed by Republican Governor Greg Abbott, who for months has unveiled a series of escalating measures on the border that have tested the boundaries of how far a state can go to keep migrants from entering the country. The law was set to take effect Saturday unless the Supreme Court intervened. The Justice Department told the court that the law would profoundly alter the status quo that has existed between the U.S. and the states in the context of immigration for almost 150 years. It went on to argue that the law would have significant and immediate adverse effects on the country's relationship with Mexico and create chaos in enforcing federal immigration laws in Texas. The federal government cited a 2012 Supreme Court ruling on an Arizona law that would have allowed police to arrest people for federal immigration violations, often referred to by opponents as the Show Me Your Papers bill. The divided high court found that the impasse in Washington over immigration reform did not justify state intrusion. In a statement Monday, the Texas Attorney General's office said the Texas law mirrored federal law and was adopted to address the ongoing crisis at the southern border, which hurts Texans more than anyone else. In a 114-page ruling Thursday, Ezra rebuked Texas's immigration enforcement and brushed off claims by Republicans about an ongoing invasion along the southern border due to record-high illegal crossings.
10,000 migrants a day. That is what federal officials say they are encountering at the U.S. southern border on average.
In instances of detaining or turning away people attempting to cross into the United States from Mexico.
Officials say that those efforts have helped to decongest the U.S. border and that they do not need to suspend legal travel anymore.
U.S. officials now warning that the situation is nearing a, quote, breaking point.
Ezra added that the law violates the U.S. Constitution's Supremacy Clause, conflicts with federal immigration law, and could get in the way of U.S. foreign relations and treaty obligations. According to Ezra's ruling, allowing Texas to supersede federal law due to an invasion would amount to nullification of federal law and authority, a notion that is antithetical to the Constitution and has been unequivocally rejected by federal courts since the Civil War. Under the Texas law, state officers can arrest people suspected of entering the country illegally. Once in custody, people arrested can agree to a Texas judge's order to leave the country or face a misdemeanor charge for entering the U.S. illegally. Migrants who don't leave after being ordered to do so could be arrested again and charged with a more serious felony. Republicans who back the law have said it would not target immigrants already living in the U.S. because the 2-year statute of limitations on the illegal entry charge would be enforced only along the state's border with Mexico. Texas has been arresting migrants for years under a different program that is based on criminal trespass arrests. Though Ezra said some might sympathize with Texas officials' concerns about immigration enforcement by the federal government, he said that was not enough to excuse a violation of the U.S. Constitution. The battle over the Texas immigration law, known as Senate Bill 4, is one of multiple legal disputes between Texas officials and the Biden administration over how far the state can go to patrol the Texas-Mexico border and prevent illegal border crossings. Several Republican governors have backed Abbott's efforts, saying the federal government is not doing enough to enforce existing immigration laws. Some of Abbott's attempts to impede illegal border crossings have included a floating barrier in the Rio Grande, which Ezra previously blocked and is part of an ongoing legal battle, and placing razor wire along the state's boundary with Mexico. State Guard officers have also blocked U.S. Border Patrol agents from accessing a riverfront park in Eagle Pass that was previously used by federal agents to process migrants. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.